The flame that saved an empire. The story of Greek fire. They called it liquid fire, and when it struck, there was no escape. In the sweltering summer of 674 CE, as Arab warships closed in on Constantinople, the defenders unleashed a weapon that defied the natural order, fire that burned on water, clung to ships, and couldn't be extinguished. The Arab sailors, veterans of countless naval conquests, found themselves trapped in a floating inferno as Byzantine dromons maneuvered with deadly precision, projecting streams of this mysterious substance that consumed everything it touched. This was Greek fire, the most closely guarded military secret of the medieval world, a weapon so devastating and psychologically terrifying that it would secure Byzantine naval supremacy for over 7 centuries. While empires rose and fell around them, the Byzantines maintained their grip on the Mediterranean with this single technological advantage that no enemy could counter or replicate. A weapon born from desperate innovation that would become the ultimate guardian of classical civilization's final outpost. Origins in Shadow, Callinicus and the Byzantine Struggle. In the labyrinthine streets of 7th century Heliopolis, a Syrian refugee named Callinicus worked feverishly in his makeshift workshop. The son of an architect, his hands were those of a craftsman, but his mind operated with the precision of an alchemist. The Byzantine Empire that had welcomed him was teetering on the brink of annihilation. The explosive expansion of the Arab Caliphate had already swallowed his homeland, and now Constantinople itself lay in the crosshairs of an ambitious naval assault. Emperor Constantine IV, barely 30 years old, and already bearing the weight of a millennium-old legacy, knew the empire's conventional defenses would not withstand the coming storm. What happened next remains shrouded in historical controversy. Some chronicles credit Callinicus as the sole inventor of Greek fire, while others suggest he merely refined existing incendiary technologies known to the ancient world. The Byzantines had inherited a rich tradition of fire-based weapons from the Romans, who themselves had adopted early versions from the Greeks. Persian naphtha, a naturally occurring petroleum that could be ignited and hurled at enemies, had been used in warfare for centuries. But something revolutionary was about to emerge from this fusion of desperate necessity and accumulated knowledge. The courts of Constantinople buzzed with alchemical experimentation. Here was the last great repository of classical learning in a world rapidly descending into what would later be called the Dark Ages. Libraries still contained texts from Alexandria's great collection, and scholars continued traditions dating back to Aristotle. In this intellectual hothouse, the components for a revolutionary weapon slowly came together. Quicklime, sulfur, naphtha, and resins, all known substances, but combined in precise proportions and delivered through an ingenious new mechanical system. The resulting substance wasn't merely another incendiary, it was something that defied the natural order, a liquid that intensified when exposed to water. The operation to develop this weapon proceeded under the strictest secrecy. Constantine IV sealed off a section of the imperial workshops, creating what might be considered the world's first classified military research facility. The penalty for revealing any detail about the project was death, not just for the offender, but for their entire family. Workers on different stages of production knew only their specific tasks, never the complete formula or mechanism. This compartmentalization wasn't paranoia, it was existential necessity. If the secret escaped, Constantinople's last decisive advantage would evaporate. By 653 CE, as Arab fleets prepared for their push toward the imperial capital, the weapon moved from experimental phase to deployment. Constantine ordered specialized drones, swift Byzantine warships, to be retrofitted with bronze tubes connected to pressure pumps, creating projection systems mounted prominently on their bows. The substance itself was stored in heated, pressurized containers below deck, tended by specially trained crews who knew the volatile nature of their cargo. These sailors, who would soon be christened the Fire Bearers, trained rigorously in the Golden Horn, away from prying eyes, preparing for a confrontation that would determine whether Byzantium, and with it the last continuous link to the classical world, would survive or perish. As the Arab fleet assembled off the coast of Syria in early 674 CE, rumors of a terrible new weapon had already reached their commanders. Most dismissed these stories as psychological warfare, a desperate ploy by a weakening empire. They had faced Byzantine fire weapons before and developed countermeasures: wet hides draped over ships, vinegar sprays to douse flames. Whatever the Byzantines had devised, they reasoned, would prove no match for the Caliphate's overwhelming numerical superiority. It was a fatal miscalculation. Within months, the Mediterranean would be illuminated by a weapon unlike anything seen before in the history of warfare, a creation born in shadow that would soon emerge in brilliant, devastating light. The clash at Bosporus, Yazid ibn Shigara, and the Byzantine dromons. The Arab admiral, Yazid ibn Shigara, stood transfixed on his flagship's deck as Byzantine vessels approached his fleet near the Bosporus in the summer of 674. What happened next would be seared into the collective memory of the Umayyad Caliphate for generations. The Byzantine dromons suddenly accelerated, their skilled oarsmen propelling them into precise firing positions. A distinctive hissing sound, like 1,000 vipers striking in unison, filled the air as pressurized tubes on the enemy ships' prows unleashed streams of liquid fire that arced through the sky before crashing onto the Arab vessels. "It boils up and shoots forth," wrote the terrified Arab chronicler al-Tabari years later. "It burns even stones and sand." Water only increases its intensity. This wasn't hyperbole. Men threw themselves overboard to escape the flames, only to find the fire following them, spreading across the water's surface in defiance of natural law. The substance clung to flesh with terrible tenacity, impossible to extinguish, consuming everything it touched. Some ships became floating pyres within minutes, their crews faced with the impossible choice between fire and drowning. By nightfall, the Caliphate had lost dozens of vessels without the Byzantines suffering a single casualty. What made Greek fire revolutionary wasn't merely its destructive power, but its complete negation of all known countermeasures. Sand, the standard firefighting agent aboard wooden ships, proved useless. Water, rather than quenching the flames, caused them to spread with renewed vigor. The Byzantine chronicles, careful never to reveal the weapon's composition, nonetheless gloated over the terror it inspired. The enemy ships burned like torches, and the sea itself seemed to be on fire. Archaeological evidence suggests the flames reached temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees, sufficient to melt metal fittings and reduce oak timbers to ash within minutes. The delivery system proved as revolutionary as the substance itself. Leo the Deacon's account describes hollow tubes made of bronze, called siphons, mounted on the prows of Byzantine warships. These connected to pressure pumps below deck, where teams of specialized sailors operated bellows and heating chambers. The entire apparatus required precision engineering that would not be matched for centuries. Modern reconstructions suggest the system functioned similarly to a modern flamethrower, with pressurized air forcing the heated, combustible liquid through the nozzle. The critical innovation lay in maintaining consistent pressure and temperature. Too cold, and the mixture wouldn't ignite. Too hot, and the ship risked self-immolation. Viking raiders who terrorized much of Europe with impunity learned to give Byzantine waters a wide berth after their first encounter with Greek fire in 941. The Norse sagas describe it as Greek tinder and speak of a flame that water cannot quench. One account tells of berserkers, elite Viking warriors who typically fought with fearless abandon, throwing down their weapons and fleeing at the mere sight of the Byzantine fireships. The psychological impact often proved as valuable as the physical destruction, with enemy fleets sometimes retreating before a single shot was fired. Contemporary accounts describe the substance itself with awe and terror. "It comes forth with a thunderous noise and smoke like unto a fiery cloud," wrote one witness. The Byzantine Emperor, Constantine IV Porphyrogenitus, while carefully avoiding any description of its composition, noted in his diplomatic handbook that the secret of Greek fire ranked alongside the imperial regalia as symbols of Byzantine legitimacy granted by God himself. The weapon's deployment became ritualized, accompanied by religious ceremonies and the chanting of prayers. Byzantine sailors believed divine protection necessary when handling what they considered a manifestation of heavenly fire. The tactical flexibility Greek fire offered transformed naval warfare. Before its invention, sea battles typically culminated in boarding actions. Ships would grapple together, and the contest would be decided by infantry fighting on deck. Greek fire changed this paradigm completely. Byzantine dromons could engage at a distance, projecting streams of fire up to 30 meters. This allowed them to dictate the terms of engagement, keeping enemy vessels at optimal range for their weapon, while remaining beyond the reach of conventional attacks. Smaller Byzantine fleets routinely defeated much larger enemy armadas through superior positioning and the targeted application of their incendiary weapon. Perhaps most remarkably, Greek fire could be delivered with surgical precision. Unlike wildfire catapult shot or other incendiaries, the siphon system allowed operators to direct the stream exactly where they wanted it. They could target an enemy ship's sails to immobilize it, sweep the deck to eliminate enemy marines, or focus on the hull to ensure complete destruction. In the hands of experienced crews, it became the ancient world's equivalent of a precision-guided munition, deployed not just for maximum damage but for specific tactical outcomes. By the end of the First Arab Siege in 678, the Caliphate had lost over 2,000 ships. Emperor Constantine IV had transformed from a ruler, fighting for survival, into the savior of Christendom. Greek fire had demonstrated its potential not just as a weapon, but as the ultimate arbiter of Mediterranean power. As news spread of the mysterious Byzantine weapon, enemies began to look upon the empire's naval forces with a superstitious dread. The Romans of old had made the Mediterranean Mare Nostrum, our sea, through centuries of conquest. Now, their Byzantine successors would maintain that legacy through the controlled application of a substance so terrifying that legends would surround it for a millennium to come. The unyielding defense of Constantinople. The Arab Caliphate never expected to lose. By 674 CE, their expansion had seemed divinely ordained, with victories cascading from the Arabian Peninsula across North Africa and deep into the Persian Empire. Constantinople represented the ultimate prize, a royal road to the conquest of Europe itself. For 4 consecutive summers, they hammered at the Byzantine capital with a fleet of over 1,800 ships, expecting each season to deliver the final blow. Instead, they met Greek fire. "The Romans have discovered a fire that jumps and moves as if it were a living thing," wrote an Arab chronicler, describing the devastating naval battles outside Constantinople's sea walls. By 678 CE, Caliph Muawiyah I, one of history's most astute military commanders, was forced to sign a humiliating 30-year peace treaty and pay an annual tribute of 3,000 gold pieces, 50 slaves, and 50 thoroughbred horses to the empire he had planned to conquer. The impossible had happened. Byzantium, outmatched and surrounded, had reversed the tide of Islamic expansion that had seemed unstoppable for half a century. The strategic implications were immediate and far-reaching. The Byzantines transformed from desperate defenders into masters of their maritime domain. Emperor Constantine IV, leveraging the breathing room this victory provided, reorganized the empire into the theme system, military districts that strengthened provincial defense. These reforms, impossible without the reprieve Greek fire had purchased, would sustain Byzantine power for centuries to come. The young emperor, once dismissed by Arab leaders as merely the latest in a line of doomed rulers, now stood as the shield of Christendom, with Greek fire as his sword. In the decades that followed, the Byzantine navy evolved from a defensive force into the Mediterranean's preeminent maritime power. The elite imperial fleet, centered on Constantinople and commanded directly by the emperor, trained relentlessly in Greek fire deployment. These droman warships, sleeker and faster than their predecessors, became platforms specifically designed around their devastating weapon. Their crews operated with practiced precision, maneuvering into optimal firing positions while maintaining the precise conditions needed for the weapon's deployment. Technical innovations followed, including smaller, handheld versions for boarding actions and defensive use on land. The psychological impact on Byzantine enemies proved as valuable as the physical destruction. Arab naval commanders, once eager for glory in battle against the Byzantines, now approached such engagements with trepidation. Viking raiders who terrorized much of Europe's coastline with impunity gave Byzantine waters a wide berth after their devastating defeats. The mere appearance of fire-bearing dromons often prompted enemy retreats without a single shot fired. Byzantine military manuals from the period explicitly note the intimidation value, instructing commanders to demonstrate the weapon when possible to instill terror in the barbarians. Perhaps most critically, Greek fire secured Byzantine control over vital Mediterranean trade routes. Constantinople sat astride the nexus between East and West, controlling the Bosporus Strait, the maritime choke point connecting the Black Sea to the Mediterranean. With naval supremacy established, the Byzantine Empire collected lucrative customs duties from every merchant vessel passing through these waters. This commercial dominance filled imperial coffers, funding both military expenditures and the lavish court culture that dazzled foreign visitors. While Western Europe languished in the economic depression of the early Middle Ages, Constantinople remained a thriving metropolis, sustained by trade routes protected by Greek fire. The weapon's strategic importance became most apparent during the Second Arab Siege of Constantinople in 717-718. The Umayyad Caliphate, having built a new fleet specifically designed to counter Greek fire, launched an ambitious two-pronged assault on the Byzantine capital. Emperor Leo III, commanding personally from the city walls, deployed his fire ships with devastating effect. Contemporary accounts describe the sea boiling with flame as the Arab fleet burned. By spring of 718, the Caliphate had lost over 500 ships, with thousands of sailors and marines perishing in the waters of the Bosporus. Of the massive invasion force that had set out to conquer Constantinople, barely 10% returned home. This decisive victory, again secured primarily through Greek fire, had consequences that would reshape world history. Had Constantinople fallen in 718, Islamic expansion into southeastern Europe would have proceeded unchecked, potentially altering the religious and cultural development of the continent. Instead, the Byzantine Empire endured as Christianity's eastern bulwark, giving Western Europe crucial centuries to develop its own military capabilities. Historian Edward Gibbon would later write that, without this Byzantine victory, perhaps the interpretation of the Quran would now be taught in the schools of Oxford, and her pulpits might demonstrate to a circumcised people the sanctity and truth of the revelation of Muhammad. Behind the spectacular naval victories lay a sophisticated logistics operation dedicated to Greek fire production and deployment. Secret facilities near the Golden Horn manufactured the substance under heavy guard, with workers sworn to secrecy under penalty of death. Specialized storage facilities maintained the precise conditions needed to keep the volatile substance stable during storage. The entire operation represented a medieval version of a classified military-industrial complex, with multiple layers of security and compartmentalized knowledge preventing any single person, save perhaps the emperor himself, from knowing the complete formula and mechanism. By the early 9th century, Greek fire had transformed from an emergency measure into a cornerstone of Byzantine grand strategy. Emperor Theophilos, receiving a delegation from the Abbasid Caliphate in 829, arranged a demonstration of the weapon as both entertainment and warning. As the Arab ambassadors watched from a safe distance, a condemned prisoner was brought forward and doused with the substance. At a signal from the emperor, it was ignited. The chronicles record the horrified reaction of the ambassadors as the man was consumed by flames that could not be extinguished, his screams echoing across the hippodrome. The message was unmistakable: challenge Byzantine naval power at your peril. For over 3 centuries after its introduction, Greek fire served as the ultimate guarantor of Byzantine survival, a technological advantage that compensated for the empire's dwindling manpower and territorial losses. While land borders might shift and provinces fall to invaders, Constantinople remained secure behind its massive walls, sustained by sea lanes that no enemy could close. The empire that historians would later call Byzantium had transformed from Rome's fading eastern shadow into a distinctive civilization in its own right, one whose continued existence rested significantly on controlled access to liquid fire. The secret recipe of Greek fire in Constantine VII's manual. Emperor Constantine VII, Porphyrogenitus, hunched over his writing table in the imperial palace, quill poised above parchment. The mid-10th century ruler was compiling his famous work De Administrando Imperio, a governing manual for his son and heir, covering everything from diplomatic protocols to military strategy. When he reached the section on Greek fire, his hand hesitated. The formula is divinely revealed to the great Constantine by an angel, he wrote cryptically, then added with unmistakable firmness, this secret must never be shared with any foreign nation. This imperial injunction reflected centuries of Byzantine security protocols surrounding Greek fire. Even as the emperor wrote his treatise, the weapon's formula remained the Byzantine state's most closely guarded secret, protected by a security apparatus that would impress modern intelligence agencies. The complete formula was divided among a handful of individuals, each knowing only their portion, with the full recipe reserved exclusively for the imperial family and perhaps the Grand Drungarios, commander of the imperial fleet. Those who worked in production facilities were selected from families with multi-generational loyalty to the throne, subjected to rigorous background checks, and bound by sacred oaths. The penalty for attempting to reveal the secret was immediate execution, not just for the traitor, but for their extended family. Court records mention several cases where entire households were eliminated after a member was suspected of sharing technical details with foreign powers. In one notorious incident during the reign of Michael III, a chemist who had worked in Greek fire production sought asylum with the Abbasid Caliphate, allegedly prepared to reveal the formula. Byzantine agents intercepted him in Cyprus, publicly burning him alive with the very substance he had intended to compromise, a poetic punishment and deterrent display in one. Despite this secrecy, historical sources offer tantalizing clues about the composition. The 10th century military treatise known as the Tactica of Leo VI mentions prepared sulfur, Median oil, likely petroleum from the Middle East, and resinous pine. Arab chroniclers who witnessed its effects described it as a mixture that included salt, oil, brimstone, quicklime, pitch, and other combustibles. The 12th century Muslim physician Ibn al-Baytar noted that it contained petroleum, sulfur, quicklime, and possibly exotic gums and resins from the East. The Byzantine historian Anna Komnene, writing in the Alexiad, her biography of her father, Emperor Alexios I, provided one of the most tantalizing descriptions. This fire is made by the following arts. From the pines and certain such evergreen trees, inflammable resin is collected. This is rubbed with sulfur and put into tubes of reed, and is blown by men, using it with violent and continuous breath. Then in this manner it meets the fire on the tip and catches light and falls like a fiery whirlwind on the faces of the enemies. Archaeological evidence has provided additional clues. Excavations of Byzantine shipwrecks have revealed specialized bronze pumps and pressure vessels with distinctive nozzles, the delivery system for Greek fire. Residue analysis from several sites has detected traces of petroleum, sulfur, quicklime, and pine resin. Interestingly, the exact ratios vary between samples, suggesting the formula may have evolved over time or been adapted for different tactical situations. Modern scientists have proposed several theories about the precise chemical composition. The most plausible suggest Greek fire was a petroleum-based mixture, likely using naturally occurring crude oil from wells near the Black Sea or Caucaspian regions. This would have been refined and combined with pine resin to create a sticky, napalm-like substance. Quicklime, calcium oxide, adds a critical property. It reacts violently with water, generating intense heat. This explains one of Greek fire's most terrifying characteristics. Water caused it to burn more ferociously rather than extinguishing it. The addition of sulfur would have created suffocating toxic fumes, increasing the weapon's psychological impact. Some reconstructions have suggested saltpeter, potassium nitrate, might have been included, an intriguing possibility, as this would make Greek fire a predecessor to gunpowder. Other candidates include calcium phosphide, which generates self-igniting phosphine gas when wet, potentially explaining how the substance could ignite upon contact with water. The delivery system represented an equally impressive technological achievement. Emperor Constantine IV described it as a closely guarded secret, writing that the siphons were constructed by a certain ancient family whose line extends back continuously to the present day, and who fashioned them according to the knowledge handed down from father to son. The pressurized nature of this apparatus represented medieval engineering at its most sophisticated, requiring precise metalwork and an understanding of pneumatic principles that wouldn't become common in Europe for centuries. Foreign powers launched numerous espionage operations to steal the formula. The Abbasid Caliphate offered enormous bounties to anyone who could deliver the secret, while Bulgarian and Russian agents repeatedly attempted to infiltrate the production facilities. In 941, after suffering devastating losses to Greek fire in the Bosporus, the Rus prince Igor reportedly offered a fortune in silver for the formula, an amount equivalent to several years of Byzantine naval expenditure. The offer was declined. The Byzantines themselves occasionally weaponized this foreign desire for the formula. During diplomatic negotiations, they would hint that military assistance might be rewarded with technical information about Greek fire, promises that were never fulfilled but served to string along potential allies. In several documented cases, Byzantine agents provided false formulas to enemies, resulting in catastrophic accidents when these powers attempted to produce their own versions. An Arab chronicle describes how an Egyptian attempt to create Greek fire, based on stolen information, resulted in an explosion that destroyed an entire workshop and killed dozens of workers. The mystique surrounding Greek fire's composition served Byzantine interests as effectively as the weapon itself. By cultivating an aura of supernatural power around the substance, describing it as holy fire or divine punishment, the Byzantines enhanced its psychological impact. Enemies who believed they faced not merely a chemical weapon, but a manifestation of divine wrath were more likely to retreat rather than risk destruction. The Byzantine Church actively promoted this narrative, with priests blessing the fire-bearing ships before battle and attributing victories to divine intervention rather than chemistry. This strategy of deliberate mystification worked so well that even today, despite modern chemical analysis and archaeological evidence, we cannot be absolutely certain of Greek fire's exact composition. What we do know is that it represented the perfect fusion of naturally occurring materials, sophisticated engineering, and rigorous operational security, a combination that kept the Mediterranean under Byzantine control for centuries. In an age when most military technology diffused rapidly across civilizational boundaries, Greek fire remained exclusively Byzantine, a testament to what was perhaps history's most successful state secrecy program. Masters of Fire, the elite Byzantine naval unit. In the pre-dawn darkness, a specialized Byzantine naval unit assembled on the shores of the Golden Horn. These weren't ordinary sailors, but members of the elite siphonatores, the fire-bearers, whose training made them the most specialized naval combatants of the medieval world. Selected from families with generations of naval service, they had passed rigorous background checks before learning even the basic aspects of Greek fire deployment. Now they prepared for training exercises that would hone their skills to lethal precision. Their commander, the Protosiphonarios, surveyed the assembled crews with a critical eye. A veteran of dozens of naval engagements, he bore the distinctive burn scars that marked many in his profession. "Today we practice the Northern Wind deployment," he announced, referring to a specialized firing pattern designed for use against the shallow draft vessels favored by Viking raiders. The men nodded grimly, knowing that the slightest mistake during these drills could result in horrific injury or death. When working with Greek fire, there was no margin for error. The Byzantine Navy's elite fire units operated under a command structure entirely separate from regular naval forces. These specialized troops answered directly to the Grand Drungarios, commander of the imperial fleet, who in turn reported only to the emperor himself. This segregation served dual purposes, It maintained operational security around the empire's most valuable military asset, while creating a core of specialists whose expertise exceeded anything their enemies could field. Byzantine military manuals emphasized that Greek fire operators required at least 2 years of intensive training before being considered combat-ready, an astonishing investment in an era when most military training consisted of little more than basic weapons drills. The secret fire siphon system represented the pinnacle of Byzantine military engineering. The typical apparatus consisted of a bronze pump mechanism that forced the heated liquid through a narrow tube, creating a pressurized stream that could be projected up to 30 meters. Maintaining precise pressure proved crucial. Too little, and the stream would fall short of enemy vessels. Too much, and the apparatus risked catastrophic failure. The mechanics who maintained these devices formed their own specialized guild, with knowledge passing from master to apprentice under strict supervision. Even more sophisticated was the heating system that maintained Greek fire at its optimal temperature. Too cold, and the mixture would fail to ignite properly. Too hot, and it might explode prematurely. Contemporary accounts describe complex bronze cauldrons with calibrated ventilation systems that allowed operators to maintain temperature within a narrow range. These cauldrons connected to the siphon apparatus through insulated tubes, often wrapped in asbestos cloth, a material the Byzantines mined in Cyprus and used extensively for its fire-resistant properties. What truly set the siphonatores apart was their operational discipline. While other medieval forces relied primarily on individual prowess, Byzantine fire units functioned as precisely coordinated teams. Each droman assigned to fire duty carried a crew of specialists with distinct roles. Navigators positioned the vessel for optimal firing angle. Pump operators maintained consistent pressure. Heating specialists monitored temperature. And the siphonator himself aimed and triggered the weapon. This division of labor required intensive training in coordinated action, a revolutionary concept in medieval warfare. Safety protocols bordered on obsessive. Fire-bearers wore specialized protective equipment, including asbestos-lined gloves and face coverings. Before each deployment, a specific series of safety checks was performed, with officers calling out questions and operators responding with prescribed answers, a procedure remarkably similar to modern pre-flight checklists. The Byzantine military manual, known as the Tactica, dedicates several pages to emergency procedures for various malfunctions, emphasizing that no man shall abandon his station even if fire spreads to the vessel itself. The psychological preparation proved as rigorous as the technical training. Fire-bearers were subject to religious ceremonies before deployment, including specialized prayers and blessings. These rituals served practical psychological purposes. They steeled men for the awesome responsibility of wielding a weapon many considered semi-divine in nature, while reinforcing the sacred obligation to maintain its secrets. The Byzantine Church played an active role in this psychological conditioning, with specialized priests assigned to the fire fleets who emphasized the divine origins of Greek fire and the sacred duty of its operators. Training exercises revealed the sophistication of Byzantine fire tactics. Crews practiced specific firing patterns designed for different enemy vessel types. Low, sweeping streams for Arab dhows, with their vulnerable lateen sails, concentrated bursts against the hulls of heavier Western ships, and rapid, precisely aimed shots to eliminate the command positions on enemy flagships. The most elite units mastered the dreaded double stream technique, where two ships coordinated their fire to create a crossing pattern from which no enemy vessel could escape. Specialized dromons emerged as the primary platforms for Greek fire deployment. These vessels featured distinctive architectural modifications, including reinforced forward decks to support the weight of the apparatus, and specialized ventilation systems to disperse toxic fumes. Most distinctive was the bronze tube, often cast in the shape of a lion or dragon's head, that protruded from the prow, swiveling on a specialized mount to allow targeting in a 180-degree arc. Behind this imposing figurehead sat a complex arrangement of pumps, valves, and heating chambers that occupied nearly a third of the vessel's internal space. Maintaining operational security around this elite force required extraordinary measures. Fire-bearers lived in separate barracks, often on isolated islands in the Sea of Marmara, where their contact with foreigners could be strictly controlled. They received premium pay, triple the wages of ordinary sailors, but faced severe restrictions on their personal freedom, including limitations on travel and marriage. Many came from families that had served in the fire fleets for generations, creating closed communities with intense loyalty to the imperial throne. The most experienced fire-bearers joined the Emperor's personal fire fleet, a small but devastatingly effective force based at the Bucolion harbor adjacent to the imperial palace. This elite unit, commanded by officers of patrician rank, maintained round-the-clock readiness to respond to any naval threat to the capital. Contemporary accounts suggest these imperial fireships could be deployed within 30 minutes of an alarm being raised, an astonishing level of readiness for the medieval period. This rapid response capability meant that even surprise attacks on Constantinople could be met with overwhelming force before enemy vessels reached the city's vital infrastructure. By the 10th century, Greek fire deployment had evolved into a sophisticated combined arms approach. Specialized scout vessels would locate enemy fleets and assess their composition. Regular naval forces would then maneuver to channel enemy ships into predetermined kill zones, where fire dromons waited in concealed positions. Once enemies entered these zones, the fire ships would emerge in precise formations designed to maximize their weapons' effectiveness while minimizing their vulnerability to counterattack. This tactical sophistication represented warfare at its most advanced, combining intelligence gathering, strategic positioning, and specialized weaponry in a system that wouldn't be matched until the modern era. What made the Byzantine fire-bearers truly revolutionary was their status as the world's first true technical specialists in warfare. Unlike other medieval elite forces, whose effectiveness derived primarily from physical prowess or expensive equipment, the siphonatores achieved their elite status through specialized knowledge and technical expertise. They represented a new kind of warrior, one whose power came not from strength or birth, but from mastery of complex systems. In this, they presaged the technical military specialists of later eras, from artillery officers of the gunpowder age to the missile technicians of the modern period. The devastating effectiveness of these elite units extended Byzantine naval dominance well beyond what the empire's declining resources should have permitted. Even as Byzantine territorial holdings contracted and manpower dwindled, control of the seas remained firmly in imperial hands. A contemporary Arab writer observed with grudging admiration that a single Roman fireship is worth 20 ordinary vessels, an assessment that explained how a numerically inferior Byzantine fleet could consistently defeat larger enemy forces. Through specialized training, technical sophistication, and operational discipline, the masters of Greek fire transformed a chemical compound into the cornerstone of an empire's survival. Flames across the Mediterranean, the Siege of Thessalonica, 904 CE. The early morning fog lifted slowly off the waters near Thessalonica in 904 CE, revealing a sight that froze the blood of the city's defenders. A massive Arab fleet, 54 warships under the command of the notorious Leo of Tripoli, a Byzantine renegade who had converted to Islam, had appeared seemingly from nowhere. The provincial Byzantine naval detachment, caught completely off guard, scrambled to mount a defense with just a handful of vessels. Among them was a single fireship, commanded by the veteran proto-siphonatores Theophylact. What followed entered Byzantine naval lore as the Miracle of the Five Ships. Theophylact deployed his lone fire droman with audacious precision, targeting not the enemy's front ranks but their flagship in the center of the formation. As streams of liquid fire arced across the water, panic spread through the Arab fleet. Leo of Tripoli, who had witnessed Greek fire's devastation in previous campaigns, immediately ordered a withdrawal rather than risk his entire force. The Byzantine chronicler Theophanes Continuatus would later write that 5 imperial vessels put to flight 54 ships of the Hagarenes Arabs through the power of the holy fire and the protection of the Theotokos, Virgin Mary. This engagement exemplified how Greek fire reshaped naval warfare throughout the Mediterranean. The weapon's psychological impact often outweighed its physical destruction. Enemies who had experienced its terrible effectiveness would retreat rather than risk a second encounter. The Byzantines leveraged this reputation masterfully, deploying fire ships as force multipliers that compensated for their decreasing naval numbers as the empire's resources contracted. Greek fire became not merely a weapon, but a strategic deterrent, fundamentally altering the risk calculations of any power contemplating naval action against Byzantine interests. The naval battle of Tarsus in 956 CE demonstrated how thoroughly Greek fire had transformed Mediterranean warfare. The Hamdanid fleet, attempting to break Byzantine naval supremacy off the Cilician coast, deployed specialized countermeasures they had developed specifically to neutralize Greek fire. Their ships were covered with felt soaked in vinegar and water, substances they believed would neutralize the incendiary. They arranged their formation to maintain maximum distance between vessels, preventing fire from spreading ship to ship. Most innovatively, they equipped their own vessels with primitive flamethrowers, fueled by naphtha mixtures, an early attempt to replicate the Byzantine weapon. None of these countermeasures proved effective. The Byzantine commander, Basil Hexamelites, had anticipated these adaptations and modified his own tactics accordingly. He deployed his fireships in a revolutionary pincer movement, attacking from multiple angles simultaneously. The specialized Arab defenses, designed to counter frontal assaults, proved useless against this multi-directional approach. By nightfall, 43 Arab vessels lay smoldering in the waters off Tarsus, with Byzantine losses numbering only 3 ships. The Hamdanid naval threat was eliminated for a generation. The Russian campaign against Constantinople in 941 CE revealed Greek fire's effectiveness against a completely different type of naval force. Prince Igor of Kiev led a massive fleet of small maneuverable vessels crewed by fearsome Rus' warriors who had terrorized settlements throughout the Black Sea. The Byzantine navy, caught by surprise and outnumbered, deployed just 15 fireships against hundreds of Russian vessels. Contemporary accounts describe how the Byzantine dromons maneuvered into a crescent formation and systematically targeted the densely packed Russian ships, whose wooden construction proved particularly vulnerable to Greek fire. The Chronicle of Theophanes describes the horrific scene. Some Russians threw themselves into the water, preferring to be drowned rather than burned to death. Others suffered shipwreck by trying to escape too precipitately. Still others were consumed by fire with their ships. The psychological impact proved even more devastating than the physical destructions. Russian chronicles record that survivors returned to Kiev with tales of Greek lightning wielded by sorcerer emperors, accounts that delayed further Russian naval adventures for decades. Beyond these dramatic engagements, Greek fire fundamentally altered the strategic balance throughout the Mediterranean basin. The weapon allowed the Byzantines to maintain open sea lanes that were critical to the empire's economic survival, particularly the vital grain shipments from Egypt that fed Constantinople's populace. Control of these maritime trade routes generated enormous customs revenue that filled imperial coffers, funding both military expenditures and the lavish court culture that projected Byzantine soft power throughout the region. The weapon's influence extended to naval architecture throughout the Mediterranean. Enemy powers, unable to match Greek fire's destructive potential, redesigned their vessels specifically to minimize vulnerability to the Byzantine weapon. Arab shipyards began producing vessels with compartmentalized hulls, limiting the spread of fire through internal bulkheads. Venetian ships incorporated stone shields on their sides to deflect Greek fire streams. North African vessels doubled the thickness of their hulls at the waterline, the point most targeted by Byzantine fire ships. These adaptations represented the medieval equivalent of an arms race, with naval architects throughout the region scrambling to develop defenses against the empire's signature weapon. Throughout the 10th century, the Byzantine navy refined Greek fire tactics to address evolving threats. Against the heavily armored Venetian roundships that began appearing in the eastern Mediterranean, fire crews developed the waterline shot, a precision technique that directed Greek fire at the critical junction between hull and water. Against the swift raiding vessels favored by North African corsairs, they deployed the fire curtain tactic, laying down wide swaths of burning liquid across likely escape routes. For defensive operations, imperial engineers constructed fixed Greek fire projectors at key naval choke points, creating the medieval equivalent of automated defense systems at strategic locations like the entrance to the Golden Horn. The Byzantine naval manual, known as the Naumachika, codified these tactical innovations into a sophisticated doctrine that governed Greek fire deployment. This text, restricted to senior naval officers and kept under guard when not in use, classified enemy vessel types and prescribed specific firing patterns for each. It detailed specialized formations for different tactical situations and provided decision trees for commanders to determine optimal weapon deployment, based on factors including wind direction, sea state, and enemy composition. The level of analytical rigor displayed in this manual wouldn't be matched in Western naval theory until the early 18th century. The empire occasionally shared Greek fire technology with select allies under tightly controlled conditions. During the First Arab Siege of Constantinople, 674–678 CE, Emperor Constantine IV provided specialized fire ships to his Bulgar allies, who used them to devastating effect against Arab naval forces in the Black Sea. Importantly, these ships came with Byzantine crews who maintained complete control of the technology, returning to Constantinople after the campaign concluded. This arrangement allowed the Byzantines to extend their naval power through proxies while maintaining their technological monopoly. Perhaps the most decisive Greek fire engagement of the 11th century came during the Norman invasion of the empire in 1081. Robert Guiscard, the formidable Norman leader who had already conquered Byzantine territories in southern Italy, launched an amphibious assault on Dyrrhachium, modern Durrës, Albania, with a fleet of 150 vessels carrying 30,000 troops. The newly crowned emperor, Alexios the Verferben Komnenos, faced a desperate situation. With most of his army engaged against Turkish forces in the east, he could field only a token naval force against this existential threat. Alexios turned to Venice, offering extensive trade privileges in exchange for naval assistance. The resulting Byzantine-Venetian combined fleet engaged the Normans in the Adriatic, with Byzantine fireships taking the lead role. Anna Komnene, in her Alexiad, provides a vivid account. The sea itself seemed to boil as the liquid fire spread across its surface, consuming the Norman vessels with their crews still aboard. The screams of the burning men carried across the water, causing even hardened warriors to blanch with horror. By day's end, the Norman fleet had been shattered, losing over 60 ships and thousands of troops. Though land fighting would continue, the Norman dream of conquering Constantinople had effectively ended. This engagement illustrated a crucial development in the Byzantine deployment of Greek fire, the willingness to share the weapon's use with closely allied forces within a tightly controlled operational framework. Unable to field sufficient fireships from his own depleted navy, Alexios integrated the specialized Byzantine vessels with the more numerous Venetian fleet, creating a combined force that maximized each partner's strengths. This pragmatic approach marked a significant evolution in Byzantine strategic thinking, reflecting the empire's adaptation to its diminished resources. By the late 11th century, Greek fire had transformed from a tactical weapon into a strategic centerpiece of Byzantine power projection throughout the Mediterranean. Through its controlled application, an empire with dwindling territory and manpower continued to exercise influence far beyond its apparent strength, maintaining a maritime supremacy that preserved its economic lifelines and projected power across 3 continents. As the First Crusade approached, bringing Western European powers into the Eastern Mediterranean in unprecedented numbers, this naval supremacy would face its greatest challenge yet, and Greek fire would write another chapter in the history of Byzantine resilience. The Final Embers. A Byzantine struggle against the Fourth Crusade. The Byzantine fireship glided forward through the choppy waters of the Golden Horn on April 12, 1204, its crew tense but determined. The massive Venetian fleet supporting the Fourth Crusade had penetrated Constantinople's maritime defenses, positioning their vessels for the final assault on the greatest city of Christendom. This lone Byzantine dromon, one of the few remaining ships equipped with the once-feared siphon system, represented a desperate last attempt to turn the tide. As it approached the Venetian flagship, sailors prepared to unleash the weapon that had protected their capital for over 5 centuries. The stream of liquid fire arced through the air, but instead of the terrifying conflagration that would have engulfed enemy ships in previous centuries, it produced only a sputtering flame that extinguished almost immediately upon contact with the Venetian vessel. The Byzantine sailors watched in horror as their signature weapon failed at the most critical moment. Within hours, the Crusader fleet would secure control of the harbor, leading to the fall of Constantinople and the temporary dissolution of the Byzantine Empire. Greek fire, for reasons that remain mysterious, had lost its power at the very moment when it was needed most. This dramatic failure marked the culmination of Greek fire's gradual decline. The weapon that had once guaranteed Byzantine naval supremacy had become increasingly less effective throughout the 12th century. Multiple factors contributed to this decline. Byzantine financial constraints led to reduced maintenance of the specialized equipment and less rigorous training for fireship crews. The once exclusive formula appears to have degraded, with contemporary accounts noting that the fire no longer burned with the ferocity described in imperial chronicles. Most significantly, enemies had developed effective countermeasures that neutralized much of Greek fire's psychological and physical impact. The Venetians, who had both fought against and alongside Byzantine fireships, had developed particularly effective defenses. Their ships now featured specialized hides soaked in alum solution, a fire-resistant treatment discovered through their extensive textile industry. More importantly, they had modified their naval tactics, adopting dispersed formations that prevented Greek fire from spreading between vessels and utilizing fast attack craft to disrupt Byzantine firing positions before the weapon could be deployed effectively. The Islamic powers had similarly adapted. Fatimid and later Ayyubid, naval architects redesigned their warships with specialized compartmentalization that limited fire spread. They developed their own incendiary weapons using locally sourced petroleum from the Sinai and Iraq, creating what Ibn al-Athir described as weapons that mimic the Roman fire, though lacking its full potency. These developments gradually eroded Byzantine tactical advantages, transforming Greek fire from a war-winning weapon to merely one tool in the empire's maritime arsenal. Technological stagnation within the Byzantine naval establishment compounded these external developments. The once innovative Greek fire deployment system had seen minimal improvement since the 10th century. While Byzantine military manuals from earlier periods emphasized continuous refinement of both the substance and its delivery system, texts from the Komnenian era reveal a rigid adherence to traditional methods. The specialized engineers who had once driven Greek fire innovation found themselves marginalized as court patronage shifted to land warfare specialists focusing on the Turkish threat in Anatolia. The Fourth Crusade's conquest of Constantinople in 1204 marked a decisive turning point. During the sack of the city, Crusaders seized substantial quantities of Greek fire equipment and technical documentation. More critically, they captured several skilled operators from the elite fire units. While the Crusaders failed to fully replicate the Byzantine weapon, this breach in security permanently compromised the technology's exclusivity. Upon retaking Constantinople in 1261, Emperor Michael VIII, Palaiologos, found the imperial arsenal's Greek fire facilities had been thoroughly looted, with critical components and documentation missing or destroyed. Despite these setbacks, the restored Byzantine Empire under the Palaiologan dynasty attempted to reconstitute their signature weapon. Emperor Michael VIII devoted substantial resources to rebuilding the imperial fire fleet, recruiting specialists from across the Mediterranean, and offering substantial rewards for any who could restore Greek fire to its former effectiveness. These efforts produced a weapon that contemporary accounts describe as reminiscent of the ancient fire, though lacking its full terror. This revived version saw limited deployment in naval engagements against Genoese and Venetian forces throughout the late 13th century, achieving modest tactical success, but never recapturing the strategic impact of its predecessor. Perhaps the most significant factor in Greek fire's decline was the transformative impact of a new military technology arriving from the East: gunpowder. First appearing in Byzantine territories in the late 13th century, this Chinese innovation rapidly revolutionized maritime warfare. The earliest naval cannon, while inaccurate and dangerous to their operators, offered greater range and comparable destructive power to Greek fire without requiring the complex delivery system or highly trained specialist crews. By the mid-14th century, even modest Byzantine warships carried primitive bombards alongside their traditional armament, signaling the transition to a new technological paradigm. Emperor John VI Cantacuzene, writing in his memoirs around 1360, provided what may be the last detailed imperial account of Greek fire deployment. Describing a naval engagement against Turkish vessels in the Sea of Marmara, he noted that the imperial fleet deployed both the traditional fire and the new powder weapons, finding the latter more effective against the enemy's dispersed formation. This matter-of-fact observation signals how thoroughly gunpowder had supplanted Greek fire in Byzantine naval doctrine, relegating a once revolutionary technology to secondary status within just decades of its introduction. The final confirmed use of traditional Greek fire in Byzantine service occurred during the Ottoman siege of Constantinople in 1453. As Sultan Mehmed II's massive fleet moved to control the sea approaches to the city, Emperor Constantine IV deployed the last remaining imperial fireships in a desperate night attack. Contemporary accounts describe streams of liquid fire that momentarily illuminated the darkness. But note that the Ottoman fleet, with its newer ships and dispersed formation, suffered only minimal losses. Within days, the naval battle had been decided in favor of the Ottomans, sealing Constantinople's fate. In the final hours before the city's fall, an intriguing historical footnote emerged. According to several chroniclers, Emperor Constantine ordered the last remaining Greek fire specialists to destroy all documentation and equipment related to the weapon, reportedly declaring, "This fire has protected our empire for 8 centuries. It shall die with us rather than serve our conquerors." While possibly apocryphal, this account aligns with the complete disappearance of traditional Greek fire technology following Constantinople's fall. The Ottomans, despite capturing vast Byzantine military resources, never deployed anything resembling the signature Byzantine weapon in their subsequent naval campaigns. The rapid disappearance of Greek fire technology after 1453 spawned numerous theories about its fate. Some historians suggest the final formula died with the last specialists during Constantinople's fall. Others propose that key components had become unavailable due to shifting trade patterns or environmental changes affecting source materials. More elaborate theories involve deliberate suppression of the technology by European powers who feared its destructive potential, or secret preservation by Byzantine exiles who carried the formula to Russia or other Orthodox Christian nations. Modern scientific investigators have attempted to reconstruct Greek fire based on historical accounts and chemical analysis of residues from Byzantine shipwrecks. These efforts have produced several incendiary mixtures with properties similar to those described in medieval sources. Substances that burn on water, resist extinguishing, and generate intense heat. However, none fully replicate the combination of properties that made the original weapon so devastatingly effective. The exact composition of Byzantine Greek fire thus remains one of history's enduring technological mysteries. What appears certain is that Greek fire's decline resulted not from a single catastrophic loss, but from a gradual convergence of factors: technological stagnation within the Byzantine establishment, effective countermeasures developed by enemies, resource constraints limiting production and training, and ultimately the emergence of superior military technologies. Like many revolutionary weapons throughout history, Greek fire dominated its era until adaptation and innovation inevitably produced effective counters. The legacy of Greek fire extended well beyond its active deployment. The weapon directly influenced the development of early gunpowder weapons, with many 14th-century naval bombards designed specifically to replicate Greek fire's psychological impact. Its deployment tactics shaped naval doctrine throughout the Mediterranean for centuries, with the concentrated firepower approach pioneered by Byzantine fireships finding echoes in naval formations well into the Age of Sail. Most significantly, it established the concept of technological advantage as a force multiplier, the idea that superior technology could compensate for numerical inferiority, a principle that would define military innovation for millennia to come. Perhaps Greek fire's most profound legacy lay in how thoroughly it shaped the medieval imagination. Long after its practical military applications had faded, it remained a cultural touchstone. appearing in European literature as a symbol of Byzantine exoticism and technological prowess. Western travelers to the Ottoman Empire routinely inquired about the lost secret of Greek fire, elevating a practical military technology to almost mythical status. This cultural afterlife ensured that long after its flames had been extinguished from Mediterranean waters, Greek fire continued to burn brightly in the Western historical consciousness, a testament to how thoroughly this Byzantine innovation had transformed not just warfare, but the very concept of what technology could achieve. The legacy of Greek fire in the fall of Constantinople. "Tell me about Greek fire," demanded Sultan Mehmed II, standing amid the ruins of the imperial palace in Constantinople. It was May 1453, just days after his forces had breached the ancient city's walls. Before him stood a captured Byzantine officer, one of the few survivors from the elite naval units that had deployed the empire's signature weapon in a final, futile defense. The officer remained silent, his eyes downcast. The Sultan, known for both his scholarly interests and his ruthlessness, tried again. "I offer you wealth and position if you reveal its secrets. Refuse, and you will not enjoy my hospitality." The officer finally raised his gaze to meet the Sultan's. "Your Magnificence," he replied, "I would gladly tell you, if I knew." But the fire was never entrusted to any single man. This exchange, recorded by the Ottoman chronicler Tursun Beg, encapsulates the enduring mystery that Greek fire left behind. The most devastating naval weapon of the medieval world vanished almost overnight, leaving behind a technological void that would puzzle military engineers, historians, and chemists for centuries to come. The Ottoman Empire, inheriting the Byzantine naval tradition along with much of its territory, devoted considerable resources to recreating Greek fire throughout the late 15th century. Sultan Mehmed established a specialized research facility in the former Byzantine arsenal, staffing it with captured Greek engineers and Arab alchemists. Their efforts produced several incendiary compounds, but nothing that replicated the unique properties of the Byzantine weapon. The quest to rediscover Greek fire soon spread beyond the Ottoman borders. Venice, with its maritime empire heavily dependent on naval power, established a secretive program within the arsenal to develop a substance similar to that deployed by the Greeks of old. Leonardo da Vinci, during his tenure as a military engineer for various Italian states, filled notebooks with speculative designs for weapons that could project liquid fire in the Byzantine manner. The Spanish Armada carried primitive flamethrowers inspired by descriptions of Greek fire in its 1588 campaign against England. None of these efforts produced a true equivalent to the Byzantine weapon, but they drove significant innovations in naval incendiary weapons that would influence warfare for centuries. This Renaissance fascination with Greek fire reflected more than just military pragmatism. It represented an early expression of technological archaeology, the attempt to recover lost knowledge from ancient civilizations. As classical learning returned to Western Europe, scholars pored over Byzantine texts for clues about the composition and deployment of the legendary weapon. Pseudo-Callinicus, a spurious 16th-century manuscript purporting to reveal Greek fire's formula, circulated among European alchemists and military engineers, spawning numerous experiments and at least 2 fatal laboratory accidents when researchers attempted to recreate its recipes. The 17th century brought a more scientific approach to the Greek fire mystery. Robert Boyle, one of the founders of modern chemistry, conducted systematic experiments with various incendiary compounds based on historical descriptions of the Byzantine weapon. His conclusion, published in Some reflections upon the hypothesis of alkali and acidum, 1675, suggested that Greek fire likely contained substances that undergo violent reaction when combined, producing heat sufficient to ignite accompanying oils. This basic framework, chemical components that ignite upon mixing, combined with petroleum-based fuels, would inform scientific understanding of Greek fire for the next 3 centuries. Greek fire's legacy extended beyond European powers to shape the development of naval warfare worldwide. The Chinese, who had independently developed primitive flamethrowers in the 10th century, received accounts of Byzantine fire weapons from Arab and Persian traders. Ming Dynasty naval manuals describe ghost fire projectors, influenced by these accounts, deploying petroleum-based incendiaries against Japanese pirates in the East China Sea. Russian military engineers under Peter the Great studied Byzantine military texts extensively, incorporating their understanding of Greek fire into the development of naval incendiaries used against the Ottoman fleet in the Russo-Turkish War of 1686 to 1700. The 19th century brought Greek fire fully into the modern scientific era. During the Crimean War, 1853-1856, British chemist Lyon Playfair proposed an incendiary weapon explicitly modeled on Greek fire for use against Russian ships. His formula, combining calcium phosphide and petroleum, produced a substance that ignited spontaneously on contact with water, mirroring one of the most mysterious properties attributed to the Byzantine weapon. Though the British government declined to deploy Playfair's invention, citing ethical concerns about incendiary weapons, his work represented the first scientifically rigorous attempt to recreate Greek fire based on modern chemical principles. The American Civil War witnessed what many historians consider the closest modern analog to Greek fire. Confederate chemist Isham Walker developed an incendiary projectile filled with white phosphorus and sulfur that, when fired from naval cannons, would burst into flames upon contact with wooden Union vessels. These Walker incendiaries, used in the defense of Charleston Harbor, created fires that were exceptionally difficult to extinguish with water, a property immediately compared to historical accounts of Greek fire. Union Admiral Samuel DuPont, after witnessing their effects, wrote that the Confederates have apparently rediscovered the incendiary weapon of the Byzantines, to our considerable disadvantage. Throughout the industrial age, Greek fire continued to influence the development of modern incendiary weapons. World War I saw the introduction of flamethrowers that, while mechanically more sophisticated than Byzantine siphons, operated on remarkably similar principles. World War II's development of napalm, a petroleum-based incendiary with a thickening agent that causes it to cling to surfaces, created a weapon whose properties closely paralleled those attributed to Greek fire in medieval accounts. Military historians have noted the striking similarities, with some suggesting that Greek fire represented an early version of what modern armies would rediscover as gel-based incendiaries. Archaeological discoveries have repeatedly reignited scientific interest in the Greek fire mystery. In 1985, marine archaeologists exploring a 10th-century Byzantine shipwreck near Rhodes discovered fragments of bronze apparatus bearing striking resemblance to siphon systems described in imperial military manuals. Chemical analysis of residue from these components detected traces of quicklime, sulfur, and petroleum compounds, aligning with many historical theories about Greek fire's composition. Similar discoveries in the waters off Cyprus and near the entrance to the Dardanelles have provided additional physical evidence that has narrowed the range of possible formulations. Modern chemists, working with these archaeological findings and historical accounts, have proposed several plausible recreations of Greek fire. A 2006 study published in the Journal of Archaeological Science suggested a compound of crude oil, tree resins, and quicklime that, when projected through a heated siphon, produces a stream of fire with many of the properties described in Byzantine sources. A competing theory from materials scientists at Imperial College London proposes that finely powdered calcium phosphide mixed with naphtha could create a substance that ignites spontaneously on contact with water, potentially explaining one of Greek fire's most mysterious characteristics. The intelligence and security implications of Greek fire have resonated through the centuries. The Byzantine Empire's compartmentalized security protocols for protecting the weapon's secrets, with knowledge divided among multiple individuals and facilities, anticipated modern information security practices by nearly a millennium. CIA historian David Kahn, in his analysis of historical cryptography, identified the Byzantine safeguarding of Greek fire as perhaps history's first comprehensive military security program, noting that it successfully protected critical technology for over 500 years, a security record unmatched until the modern era. This security success carries a certain historical irony. So effective was the Byzantine secrecy program that it ultimately contributed to the technology's disappearance. By restricting complete knowledge to a handful of individuals and strictly compartmentalizing production, the Byzantines ensured that no single catastrophic security breach could compromise their advantage. However, this same system meant that disruptions to the chain of knowledge transmission, whether through political upheaval, deaths of key personnel, or the fall of Constantinople itself, could result in critical information being lost permanently. In protecting their secrets so effectively from enemies, the Byzantines may have ultimately hidden it from history itself. Beyond its technical aspects, Greek fire's enduring legacy can be measured in how thoroughly it reshaped naval strategy across the medieval world. The Byzantine innovation forced a fundamental reconsideration of how sea power functioned, introducing the concept that technological advantage could compensate for numerical inferiority. This principle would become a cornerstone of naval theory, from Nelson's tactical innovations at Trafalgar to the transformative impact of the dreadnought battleship. In demonstrating that specialized weapons could render conventional force calculations irrelevant, Greek fire established a strategic paradigm that would find echoes in every subsequent military technological revolution. Perhaps most significantly, Greek fire represented one of history's clearest examples of how a single technological innovation could alter the course of civilization. Had the Byzantine Empire not possessed this decisive naval advantage during the Arab sieges of Constantinople in the 7th and 8th centuries, Islamic expansion into southeastern Europe would likely have proceeded unchecked. The political, cultural, and religious map of Europe would have been fundamentally redrawn, potentially altering the entire trajectory of Western civilization. Few weapons in history can claim such a profound, counterfactual impact on world development. The mystery of Greek fire continues to captivate historians, scientists, and military analysts today. It represents a tantalizing medieval precursor to modern chemical warfare, a sophisticated weapons system that combined advanced chemistry, mechanical engineering, and tactical doctrine into an integrated whole. It reminds us that technological sophistication was not a monopoly of the modern era, and that ancient civilizations possessed capabilities that could still impress and occasionally baffle contemporary experts. Most compellingly, it stands as a testament to how completely knowledge can be lost when circumstances align against its preservation. As modern navies deploy increasingly sophisticated weapons, from anti-ship missiles to laser defense systems, they operate within a technological paradigm first established by Byzantine fireships patrolling the Bosporus 13 centuries ago. The fundamental principle that Byzantine firebearers pioneered, that the controlled application of advanced technology can completely transform maritime power dynamics, remains the cornerstone of naval strategy in the 21st century. In this sense, the legacy of Greek fire burns as brightly today as it did when it first illuminated Mediterranean waters, a testament to Byzantine ingenuity that transcended its era to shape the very concept of naval warfare for a millennium to come.